When everyone starts sharing their personal Game of the Year lists, we'll see some obvious entries like Tears of the Kingdom, Spider-Man, and Final Fantasy, but I imagine we'll also see a small indie game sneak into some of those lists as well. That game is Gravity Circuit. Gravity Circuit is such an impossibly good game that not only does it have a guaranteed spot on my personal list, but it'll probably end up on the list of nearly anyone who plays it this year. Here's why. Now, as I briefly mentioned at the start, this year was, and still is, extremely stacked when it comes to game releases. So why am I so confident that this game will end up on so many people's Game of the Year lists despite that? Well, there are 3 reasons. Let's start with the first one, stage design. If you don't already know, Gravity Circuit is a game similar to the older Mega Man X games and Zero games. You'll start out at your base, select a stage, run through a gauntlet of platforming challenges and enemies, then finally face a boss before returning to the base to do it all again. Now let's talk about those stages, since they are most of the game. The stages feel like they were designed by a team of veterans. They're meticulously crafted and follow one of the most common patterns of game design, but they also take things a step further by doing something pretty unique that you'll only really see in truly great games. We'll get to that other part in a second, but first we need to talk about the fundamental reason this platforming works. If you've ever played a good platformer, you'll notice this trend. A concept will be introduced, then gradually increased in both difficulty and complexity. This happens all the time, and if you haven't noticed it before, once I describe it, you'll probably start to see it everywhere. Let me give you an example. So there are these lasers that show up early on in the factory stage. These lasers activate in a little over a second when you cross their sight beams. The first ones are pretty simple, just don't stand directly under the laser and you won't get hit. But as the stage progresses, you'll start to run into ones that are a bit more challenging to avoid. Lasers that curve, or ones that hit the ground, or even ones that'll block off your path over a pit of lava. These are all introduced sequentially in a way that ensures you don't get overwhelmed. Another example of this is the falling platforms in the ice stage. They once again start out simple, stand on the platform and it goes down, and later on you'll have to avoid falling icicles, break blocks of ice, or fight enemies all while on these falling platforms. This forces you to consider not just what's around you, but what's below you as well. You've probably seen this concept in plenty of different games, and I'm sure it has a name, but considering I have more fingers than IQ points, I'm not the guy to ask. The game doesn't stop there though. It actually does something else, something a bit more rare. It changes the way you use and interact with these new mechanics. Let's go back to the factory stage. This stage also has moving platforms that are introduced pretty early on. The speed and movement of these platforms change, but late in the stage there's a point where you have to hang on to the bottom of them while avoiding spikes and lasers. It's no longer just about standing on the platform, it's about how your character and their abilities can interact with it. Each stage does something like this, and I really don't want to say too much about them since these surprises were some of the coolest moments in the game for me. Regardless, I think you get the idea. These stages are brilliant, but what waits for you at the end of each stage is even better. Bosses are my favorite part of games like this, and luckily the bosses in this game are exceptional. There are plenty of reasons for their high quality. They've got super moves, they get stronger as the fight goes on, and they even press the subscribe button on high quality video essays. But all of those pale in comparison to the most important thing these bosses do that really make them stand out. These bosses encapsulate the ideas of the stage that they're in. There's one stage that takes place on top of a series of moving trucks on a highway. Naturally then, this entire stage has a frantic and quick feel to it. You'll be fighting an enemy when suddenly you'll have to duck out of the way of a highway sign that's flying straight at you. The whole stage feels like a gauntlet of reaction tests where if you lose focus for even a moment, you'll be punished for it. This idea, this feeling, then culminates in a boss that carries these exact principles. This is probably the fastest boss in the game. He does this one attack where he dashes across the screen really fast, and you know what, actually, let me just show you. You see what I mean? Fast. When you fight the bosses in this game, it feels like you're fighting a sentient version of the stage itself, and that's just such a cool idea. A much more direct example of this is the boss in the junkyard. Throughout the stage, you'll be ambushed by enemies hiding in piles of scrap, and these big blocks will fall down on you. The boss will outright do both of these things to attack you. She even carries bottles of this purple stuff, the same stuff that you see falling throughout the stage. What makes this so brilliant is the fact that before you even step foot in the arena, you already have an idea of what to expect. The boss acts as a final challenge that ensures you understand the mechanics of the stage before you're allowed to complete it. But what really makes this game special is that secret sauce that you can only find in games made by either experienced developers or newer devs who have an excellent understanding of game design. Here's what that sauce is and how it works in Gravity Circuit. So in each stage you've got these bozos who find themselves lost in the area. If you save them, you get pedestrian coins that you can use to gain new abilities called enhancement chips. These enhancement chips do anything from granting granting you a stronger hookshot to longer invincibility frames to even a double jump. Burst techniques are a lot easier to get. For these, all you need is money that you gain from exploring and defeating enemies. Now, if this was all there was to these systems, I might not have even mentioned them, but here's that secret sauce that really ties it all together. Both the enhancement chips and the burst techniques create a positive feedback loop. Let me explain. When you gain new burst abilities, defeating enemies becomes easier. When defeating enemies becomes easier, you get more money, which leads to more burst abilities. Enhancement chips work in the same way. When traversal becomes easier with the enhancement chips, naturally, exploration will become more fluid and effortless as well. And when exploring becomes effortless, you're able to find more pedestrians, which allows you to unlock more abilities, which lets you explore more, which lets you find more pedestrians, which lets you unlock more abilities, which lets you explore more, which lets you find pedestrians. Crucially, however, these abilities don't feel necessary. They really do feel like enhancements. They're just slight upgrades to what you can already do. But the base moveset feels so complete as it is that you can absolutely get away with never once using this extra stuff. That'd be a strange way to play the game, but hey, the option is there. This could even function as a sort of difficulty slider. If you have trouble with certain aspects of the game, you can make those aspects easier. For example, if you find yourself constantly dying to spikes, you can add an enhancement that lowers the damage that they deal. Or if you're just not the best at platforming, you can give yourself a double jump. It's in this way that any player is able to create a perfectly tailored experience that's just the right difficulty for them. Gravity Circuit feels like a game made by developers with a decade of experience. Not only is it extremely fundamentally sound, but the new ideas it introduces are just as numerous as they are clever. However, just how this game feels is special too, and that's because it does something no other game has done in over 20 years. Here's the video about that.